And here we go.
Welcome back to AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, for another episode of Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. Thanks for tuning into the show. If you have any questions or comments, send them to comment@am950radio.com. So lots to get to on today's show. The first segment, I'm going to talk about the Fourth Amendment as we continue on with our journey through the Constitution. So we still have a long ways to go to get through all these amendments, but today we're going to get through the Fourth Amendment. So that'll be the first segment. Second segment, I'm going to be talking about insurance, particularly property insurance. With all the fires going on and how that's going to affect the housing insurance market. So get ready to pay more for your property insurance. It's basically the short version on that. And then finally, I'm going to talk about some of the money and politics issues that I didn't quite get to last week. So that'll be the three main topics for today's show. So let's get into the first one here, about talking about the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution. So remember that the first 10 amendments are called the Bill of Rights, and they were the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, ratified in 1791. So again, keep in mind that as we're going along in these first 10 amendments, these are our rights against the government only. Okay. Mentioned that in some previous shows. Just remember, so as we go through here, this is what we're talking about, is our rights as against the government, whether that's the local government, your state government, or the federal government, not like private individuals. Okay. So the Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments are kind of grouped together to form the rights that we have as criminal defendants. All right. So hopefully this doesn't happen to you. But if you get arrested and get charged with a crime and have to go to trial and all this sort of stuff, that's what these amendments deal with. So the fourth one is the one that I'll be covering today, deals with searches and seizures mainly. Okay. So these are some of the longer type of amendments that we have. But with the fourth one, I'm going to read it through here in just a minute. It's one long sentence, right? So James Madison, he loved commas, I guess, because there's a lot of commas in this one. So this is the one that basically deals with how law enforcement can search your home or your other parts of your property, or arrest you. Right? That's what seizure means, is also like seizing you, like arresting you. So here's what the amendment says. Again, this is all one sentence with a bunch of commas in it. So it says, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So again, there's a lot in here. I'm going to talk mainly about the two main parts of it, which again are talking about searches, unreasonable searches, and unreasonable seizures. And there's some stuff in there about search warrants too. So, okay, the first issue that pops up here is, what the heck does unreasonable mean? Okay, this is like a lot of stuff in the Constitution, as I mentioned before, where the Founding Fathers didn't define any of this stuff. They didn't say what unreasonable meant. They basically were leaving it up to society to figure it out, as we go along. And in this case, it's been, for a while now, it's been the court system which has taken the lead on how to interpret these words in our Constitution. So there's all kinds of court cases involving what's an unreasonable search and what's an unreasonable seizure, and what's probable cause, right? All kinds of Supreme Court cases involving this stuff. So I'll give you just some general information about these things, but just keep in mind it's really a lot more complicated than what I'm going to go through. here today, because I could go through multiple shows on this stuff, but I'll do the best I can, just to give you some ideas of what's involved here. So again, basically, it's whatever the Supreme Court says it is what unreasonable means. And of course, the Supreme Court changes over time, and they change their opinions on stuff over time. And, a lot of it depends on who's on the court at any given time. So right now there's 6 Republicans there, right, and 3 Democrats. So this particular court is definitely more pro law enforcement in their decisions. So, typically, and this is a very general statement I'm about to make here, but it's definitely fact driven. But generally, when you see cases that are like they fine for the defendant, typically that's more of in a Democrat court. They have the majority. Whereas with law enforcement, a lot of times it's the Republicans who are in charge. But there are some cases where when the Democrats are in charge, they fine for law enforcement too. So this is a very general statement here. But right now, ever since John Roberts took over in 2005, I think it was, when he was appointed. It's that this court has been very pro law enforcement on lots of things. So I'm going to give you some examples, 5 of them I believe I have here. There's many more, but I'll just give you a taste of it here as to what are some of the common violations of a search or seizure being called unreasonable. But remember, there's going to be some exceptions to these, as with all of our amendments, right? The government can in some circumstances, limit these rights that we have. And I'm going to give you some of the exceptions for the 4th Amendment here. So the first one is, let's say a cops come to your house and they just walk in and search your place. They come up to your door. They don't even, knock or anything. They just come in and they say, hey, we're going to search your house for drugs or, whatever it is. They have no warrant, right? They got nothing. They just walk in. Okay. That's definitely an easy example of something being unreasonable, searching your house, because they got no warrant. They got nothing that really connects you to a crime. In other words, they don't have probable cause to get a warrant. And they just come in and say, hey, we're searching your place. That is something that does, it's happened before, but it's a violation of unreasonable searches and seizures. Now, so that's one scenario. And the second one is, well, let's, change this a little bit. Say, well, they knock on your door. You go and answer the door and they say, hey, we want to search your house. And they ask you for consent. So this is what they do is they say, hey, would you mind if we come and, look in your house for, X, Y, and Z because we got to complain about this. Now, if you give their consent, you give your consent for them to come in and search, that is one of the big exceptions to an unreasonable search and seizure, where you consent to let them search your place. So, one of the things you see on TV shows, the cop shows, is like lots of people say to the cops, well, you got a warrant? Well, this is one reason why, right? Is if they don't, you can tell them no. And when they ask for your consent, you can tell them no. It's okay to tell them no. And then they got to go unless they have a warrant. And they go, well, we'll just come back with a warrant. And you can always say, well, fine. You come back with a warrant. All right. So this is one of the things you got to watch for, is they ask for consent from you, because that makes the search no longer unreasonable because you've consented to it. Right. So, next one example is they search your place without probable cause that you committed or helped someone else commit a crime. Okay. They can't just like come into your house for no reason. They have to have probable cause that either you committed a crime. So they got to have some evidence, right, that you committed some crime, or that you helped somebody commit a crime. Like you're covering up for somebody, or, you helped them plan the robbery or whatever it is, right? You have some involvement. You under the law is called aided and abetted, is what a lot of the statutes say. You help somebody commit a crime. So if they don't have probable cause that, you've somehow, done a crime, that's unreasonable. Okay, and then the next one is, let's say they show up at your house with a search warrant that says they can search your house for some drugs that they think are there. They think you're hiding drugs there for whatever reason. Okay, so they look around in your house and they don't find these drugs. So then they decide they're going to go to your barn, which is a quarter mile down the road. So they go to your barn. Lo and behold, there they find the drugs. That can be an unreasonable search and seizure, because remember, one of the requirements under the Fourth Amendment is they have to define, with particularity, it says, describing the place to be searched. So the search warrant says that that the judge signed off on says they can search your house. It doesn't say they can search your barn. Now, one of the things to watch here is like, and when I was drafting search warrants, I always asked law enforcement about, like, okay, do they have an attached garage that you want to search? Well, throw that in the warrant too. If you want to look at their outbuildings, put that, you got, I always ask them, this is where, are you want to be looking there? Because if you do, you got to put it in the warrant. You can't just put house in there and then go look somewhere else, because you've violated the Fourth Amendment there. So, a court could find that to be unreasonable. Okay, so unless the barn is in the search warrant, they exceeded the scope of the warrant. Now, these same sorts of things that I just mentioned also apply to your car. Cops can't just pull you over because, for whatever reason. I mean, they got to have a reason to pull you over. Of course, probably the most popular ones are you're speeding, or you went over the center line, or your registration on your license plate has the wrong year. They don't need much to pull you over. They just need some little old traffic violation most of the time, and they can pull you over. But they, with absent that, they just can't pull you over. They also can't just search your trunk for no reason. But here again, this is where they go, well, do you mind if, we search your trunk? Do you give us permission? Do we have your consent to, search your trunk? And if you say, yeah, go ahead, well, that's an exception to the warrant requirement. So, but if you're not hiding anything back there, you can all, it's your choice to say yes or no, but you can't say no. And if they say, well, we'll have to, impound your car and to get a warrant to search it, it's like, well, go ahead. I had to draft some of those warrants when I was prosecuting. So, watch out for when they, ask for your consent about stuff. So there, these are 5 of the common unreasonable search and seizure type of things, but remember that they're all fact-driven situations. So I gave you some of the obvious ones where, this violates unreasonable search and seizure, but here are some 6 exceptions now. So number 1, I already talked about, you consent to the search. That basically, gets rid of it being unreasonable if you consent. And there are some laws that, Congress has passed that have reduced our freedoms, as I mentioned before. So one place is international borders, where they can basically, search whoever they want. They can, if you're in line at, the border, they can pick you out and search you and stuff. And you see this at airports too sometimes, where they just randomly pick some people to search. Right. Number 3 is drug tests. So cops can force you to take drug tests or breathalyzers, if they think you have a DWI. So in, I think, pretty much every state now, it is a crime for you to refuse the test. So this is an exception. Now, other place for exception, of course, is at your workplace. Because remember, these rights only apply to the government. These rights do not apply to your employer. So your employer can make part of your job that you got to undergo periodic drug tests. Lots of businesses do this. You can't stop them. Like, that's part of, your job, and they can do it because they're not the government. So the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to them. Similarly, kind of, the fourth one is school searches. Like, by going to the school, you basically consent to them searching your stuff, searching your locker, right? Searching your bag, your book bag, or whatever kind of bag you're carrying. Right? So their lockers are, that's school property. It's not yours. So watch what you bring to school, right? Number 5 is prisoners. So, once you get thrown in prison, or county jail for that matter, you're treated differently. You don't have the same rights anymore, and they can search you whenever they want to. So that's an exception. And then finally, exigent circumstances is one where if someone's like running into your house and, they just murdered somebody and they ran into your house, the cops don't need a warrant. They can just run in there too. Okay, this is one in situations where public safety outweighs your, rights as a homeowner. So that's a common one where there's some like, big crime going on or something. They can just come in to do this. So those are like the 6 common exceptions. Now, what happens? Let's say you're going to trial. What happens if the judge says that law enforcement did violate your rights, like they did do an unreasonable search and seizure? Well, what the judge does is he throws out the evidence, saying your rights are violated. This is excluded from your trial. This is called the exclusionary rule. And, this is how guilty people get off sometimes. You might be guilty of these crimes, but if law enforcement violates your rights and the prosecutor doesn't have enough evidence because the judge threw it out, people get off. Guilty people get off sometimes, right? So they got to drop cases. Now, sometimes the evidence that the judge throws out, the prosecutor still may think, well, I got good enough evidence to convict you anyway, so, we're going to have your trial. That happens too. Right? So then the warrant requirement is the second part of the Fourth Amendment, where you got to show probable cause. Law enforcement has to show a judge that, yeah, they got some reason to think you committed a crime or you helped somebody commit a crime. So this is a pretty low standard, but they got to show something. And if they don't have it, prosecutors will say, well, I'm not going to let you go get a warrant because I don't see any probable cause. Now, that didn't happen with me very often, but there were times where I'm like, I think you need a little bit more than this. So go get me more evidence. Right? There were a few times where I presented a search warrant to a judge. And the judge says, I don't think you got enough probable cause here. So they didn't sign it. Right? So also with the warrant requirement, as I mentioned before, you can't go outside the scope of it. So, if you go searching in the barn, as I mentioned, and find stuff, the judge is going to throw that out. But there's a couple of exceptions to this. Right? Is law enforcement can search you when they arrest you. They don't need a warrant to, search you when they arrest you. Also, cops don't have to like close their eyes when they, look in your car, for example, when stuff is in plain view. Like they see it when they're like, let's say they're searching for drugs in your house. They come in and they see a bunch of guns laying around. They don't have to like close their eyes and say, well, no, we can't do anything about the guns. They can take the guns. Now, you might get them back later, depending on how the case shakes out. But, this happens a lot in like your vehicles when they pull you over and they see a joint there, or they smell what they think is marijuana, or they see an open booze bottle, in your lap. Okay, those are some exceptions to the warrant requirements. All right, so hopefully this gives you some, some ideas about what the Fourth Amendment talks about involving searches and seizures, and mainly, again, you have warrants involved in here too. So next week we'll talk about the Fifth Amendment. So now we're going to talk about your property insurance going up. That's what we'll talk about next. Welcome back to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, for our second segment on Politics Matters show here with Bruce Klopfleisch. So now that you know a little bit more about the Fourth Amendment, as I mentioned, we're gonna cover the Fifth Amendment next week, which has some stuff about your rights as far as talking to law enforcement is involved in there. So, but this segment, I'm going to talk about insurance, particularly property insurance. Now, you probably heard of all the fires going on in California, right? And there's all kinds of hurricanes, going on in Florida over the, a lot more of them lately over the years, and down in, the Gulf Coast area. So this is one of these segments where, politics definitely does affect you. And one way it's going to soon, I think, is increasing your property insurance. We don't have big fires in Minnesota or hurricanes in Minnesota, but we have property insurance companies in Minnesota. And as I'm going to say here in this segment, they're going to raise their rates because they're paying out a lot more money now because of climate change, despite what the Republicans say about it and their total denial of it. Right? There's been so many more claims, so many more intense storms, more intense fires, a lot more damage, like, literally billions. I mean, I don't know what that final number is going to be in California because there's still fires going on. I heard another one going on my way to the studio today. So it's not even over there. And they're I'll talk about a few numbers here in just a second, but insurance companies, they're like any other business. When their costs go way up and they don't have the money, some of them are going to close. Some of them are going to go bankrupt. Some of them are going to say, hey, I'm out of here. I'm out of this state. I just can't afford covering property in the state anymore. So bye-bye. All right. So this is going to affect your, homeowners policies. And, if you're a business owner, your business policies too. So, and I've been, in looking, doing a little research for this segment, there are people out there that have predicted this even before these fires, about the potential collapse of the property insurance companies. Maybe not all of them, but, definitely the smaller ones. And at least right now, particularly those in California, right, as a result of these fires. So already right now, a few days ago when I looked into this, they're estimating that the losses are going to be over $20 billion. Now, I'm guessing that number is going to be low, as these numbers usually are when you try and predict these things. And when you're looking at the loss of economic activity, so it's not just the property insurance numbers, but it's like, businesses gone, jobs lost, all that lost economic activity. They're forecasting over $50 billion. And depending on these policies, these insurance companies might have to cover some of these other things, not just your building. Right. But if you got to, stay in a hotel for a while, or, there's some policies, that they let you, have food for a while, or rent a car, or whatever it is. I mean, there's all kinds of other expenses that might be involved here that the insurance company's on the hook for, or supposed to be on the hook for. And then they're going to come back and tell you, sorry, we don't have the money to do this, and then you're screwed. Right. So obviously one of the big questions is whether these insurance companies have enough money to cover all these huge losses. And it's starting to look like they don't. And again, this is before the fires. But, let's hope that they do. But don't be surprised if you start hearing, people not getting their claims covered insurance companies closing, etc. After all, if you're an insurance company, how do you plan to cover all these costs? The worst fire that happens in California history, probably. Many of these property insurance companies just didn't have a plan to pay off all the claims, that are going to be coming of this, particularly the smaller ones. So, insurance companies, they get their money from us when we pay our premiums, right? And there's all, they pool all the resources of everybody who's got the insurance policy. And then they use part of that money, part of your premiums, to pay out their costs, their claims that they get. And if they have money left over, and most of them do because they charge a lot for premiums, they invest that money to try and make more money. It's not a surprise that a lot of the richest people in this country are insurance people, or own these insurance companies. But a problem, they're probably going to have a problem here where they just don't have enough money. And then they got business expenses too, like paying their employees and wages and computers and all this stuff. Well, not to mention the fact that maybe some of these insurance companies were the ones burned down in the fire. Hopefully they had insurance too, but maybe not. But when they have this leftover money, right, they invest it. And typically what they do is they pay more money to their CEOs with this money. So what might happen? Assuming that all this, that this scenario happens, well, then the government's got to start, step in, basically, is what's going to happen. This is what happened in the state of Florida after some of the latest hurricane claims are out there. That many insurance companies have left the state of Florida because it's too costly for them now. So the state of Florida had to pass some laws that basically now the state of Florida has a fund that they're putting money into to try and, cover some of these costs. If you can't get insurance from an insurance company anymore, you can get one from the state. But of course, there's always the issue of, well, is the state going to have enough money to pay all the claims when the next bad hurricane rolls through their state? But the government steps in to try and fix things, or at least make it a little simpler. So let's assume that some of these insurance companies survive. Okay, so what are they going to do? Well, they're going to start raising yours and mine and everybody in their pool of people who bought insurance from them. They're going to raise their rates because they got to get more money. Or sometimes you'll see some of these insurance companies say, we're leaving that state because it costs them too much money. Now, this is what happened to me a couple years ago. My property insurance carrier left the state of Minnesota because they paid too many claims because of hail damage. That was what I had. So I got a new roof, and then the next year they were gone. They sent you the letter saying, we're gone. You got to find your own insurance. Now, one of the problems with that is, that assumes that there's other insurance companies you can go to get insurance. Right? Well, after this fire in California, that might be easier said than done. In Florida, that's easier said than done. And for poorer people, are they going to have enough money to pay for these now inflated premiums they're going to have to pay if they want to keep property insurance on their house? And for those of you who have a mortgage, assuming the bank did what it's supposed to do, in your mortgage, it says in there, you have to have the property covered by insurance. What are you going to do if you can't afford it? What are you going to do if you can't find an insurance company to insure your house? All right, so this is a whole nother problem that's likely you're going to see happen, is all these people who lost their houses, some of them are just going to say, bank can have it. I can't rebuild. Some of these people didn't have insurance because their insurance companies notified them not that long ago that, well, we're not going to cover you anymore. And they haven't been able to find a new company. So they actually don't have insurance on their house that's now burned down. which is going to put them in very, difficult circumstances. So you're going to start seeing your house insurance premiums going up the next time they're up for a renewal because of these losses. And it's not just in California. It's all over the country. And this is because of the, climate change and all this adverse weather that we've been seeing these last number of years here. So some insurance companies have, been going around canceling policies. And if you can't find any, what are you going to do? So if that's the case, hopefully you live in a state where the state will have something in place. Is the government going to step in and help or not? Now, part of that might depend on what state you live in. I would hope the state of Minnesota would do something like that. But if you're in a Republican state, I wouldn't count on it. Florida did it, but, how much money is each person going to get? So let's remember something about insurance companies. This is very important. I've seen this when I was practicing law, where, you think the insurance company should pay you what you think things are worth. Well, not surprisingly, that's not how it works. You might have to go to court to get them to do that, because oftentimes your insurance company will come back and say, well, we don't think that's the total amount of your loss because there's lots of used things, there's old stuff, right? And so we're only going to give you this amount of money. Take it or leave it. And you got to decide, are you going to take it or leave it? And, of course, they're preying on people that'll just say, okay, well, something's better than nothing. So they take it. Well, is that going to be enough to cover your losses? And if you do contest it, well, what are you going to do in the meantime? And, that's going to take a while, and you're probably going to have to hire a lawyer to represent you. And these insurance companies know this. When they come in and give you they lowball you with these low numbers. And I'm sure this is what's going to happen in California. And sometimes the insurance companies they'll tell you, well, we just don't have enough money to cover all the claims. So this is how much you're going to get. If we're going to cover everybody's, you get this smaller amount because that's all we got. So at that point, is the government going to have its own policy or have some program where you can get more money? Don't know. I think that's something a lot of these states are going to have to look at, because I don't expect the federal government to do it. Not with the Republicans in charge now. So what's going on here? Well, it's climate change. Economics and politics, of course, are going on here. So climate change is causing bigger losses, despite what Republicans say. And again, this is where they are, into the whole denial of science and all this sort of stuff, right? They can deny, climate change all they want, but facts are facts. Science is science. This says this is becoming a bigger and bigger problem because there's more, these problems are more frequent. They're more severe. The cost of rebuilding things is going up, because of inflation, among other things, right? Things just cost more over time. And there's a lot, there's all kinds of different natural disasters that happen. We've always had hurricanes. People say this all the time. Well, we've always had hurricanes. We've always had tornadoes. What's the big deal now? So what? Well, the numbers are a lot more now. They're a lot more severe. They cause a lot more damage, which causes more and higher claims to be paid. And if the insurance companies don't have a good financial plan they may not have enough money to cover it. And then they stick you with getting enough money. And then they, of course, jack up premiums on everybody else. And, if you decide, let's say, you had insurance on your house, but you decide in California, but you decide not to rebuild or something. Well, and, the bank's going to get it, they're going to have to eat their mortgage basically, or they will try and still collect that mortgage from you unless you, sign the property over to them. And then what are they going to do with the burned down house? So there's going to be problems in the banking industry as a result of this too. Some similar to what we've seen in 2008 with the housing market and the resulting recession is the bank had all these properties they foreclosed on and they couldn't do anything with them. You might see something like that here. This is another part of the consequences of not taking climate change seriously. You got a lot of businesses that are going to be closed because they're not going to reopen because of the fires. People have lost jobs. Like, what are they going to do now? There's going to be some people who lost everything in the fire. Like, let's say they had, a bunch of cash sitting around in the house or whatever, and now it's all gone. All their belongings are gone. Maybe the bank that they have their money in is gone. Hopefully hopefully they were in a bank that's insured, and they'll get their money. But these are all things that you need to think about here. There's all kinds of things involving climate change where things down the road affect all of us in some way. So economics is involved, of course, because it's not just the homeowner and insurance companies, but it's also about the banks being affected. It's about how your local economy is going to be affected. Businesses lost, right? And if you're a home contractor, you're probably running to LA right now because you can charge a lot of money because there's going to be large demand for you. And, you might try and take advantage of people and charge them a lot more money because, if they really want their house rebuilt, well, they got to pay for it, right? This is how supply and demand works. If there's a huge demand, the price is going to go up. As I mentioned before, inflation's, you're probably going to start seeing inflation with, these building supplies and stuff too. Price of lumber is going to go up, right? Shingles, all that stuff is going to go up. Now the question is going to be, are they going to come down afterwards? And I contend that this is what the businesses did during COVID, right? They jacked up their prices and you haven't seen a lot of them come down. Or if they have, it hasn't come down very much to the pre-pandemic levels. Right? So again, banks are going to have to foreclose on these properties and they're going to get stuck with this. It's going to affect their balance sheets. Banks might raise their interest rates on future loans or slow down making loans to other people who may want to rebuild because, their financial situation is not very good. So it might be harder to buy a house out there. And banks may just not want to lend money to like certain parts of the state where there's it's really fire prone. Like every, few years there's a fire. Well, banks might just say, ain't worth the risk to us anymore. We're not going to give you a loan. You can see stuff like that going on too. And of course, politics comes into this in many ways, but I'm just going to highlight a few of them here. Is the government going to have to do a bailout for some of these insurance companies? And of course, which government is it? Is it going to be the state of California government? Is it going to be the federal government? Is it going to be some local government? And how much? What's the number that they're going to come up with? And to fund this, you might have to raise taxes on people. Will the politicians vote for this? Again, depends on what state you're in, probably. You got a better chance of California than in, some Republican states. Now, oftentimes when insurance companies start pulling their, business out of your state, there's going to be some more shadier type insurance companies, moving in, trying to get some of the action. You can see some of that starting to pop up where the government may not regulate the insurance companies as hard as they are now to try and fill this gap so that the state doesn't have to pay as much money or taking up, as much risk in the future. But, if you got shady insurance companies, this is part of what happened in the 2008 recession. The government needed to save the banks. So something like this could happen here. So, and of course, with Trump coming in and the Republicans taking over, the Republicans do this all the time where they're going to do less regulations. We're going to get rid of these Regulations on businesses. Well, this could be this will be an effect of it. Or it likely is going to cost you more money. And if the government needs to cover more things, well, you could see a tax increase in your future. So, and then another problem, of course, is as I keep talking about is, the fossil fuel industry just shovels cash to politicians, right? To fund their campaigns and this kind of thing. So they're going to keep doing this, right? Even though the evidence of climate change is certainly out there, but you give people enough money, they'll do what you want them to do. Well, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of politicians, that's the way they look at things. So this is going to lead to probably to a cycle of bad policies. So this is just, just keep an eye on this. And I'm pretty sure when you see your next property insurance bill, it's going to go up, and it might go up quite a bit. All right, so we're going to take a break here. And when I come back, we're going to talk about social media some more and money in politics. So we'll see you on the other side of the break.
Those crazy nights.
All right, welcome back to AM 950, the Progressive Voice of Minnesota, for the third and final segment on this week's show, Politics Matters, how civics, politics, and law affect you. I'm your host, Bruce Klopfleisch. So for this segment, which is going to be a short one, but I think the insurance and the Fourth Amendment segments, needed that extra time because they're pretty important, I think. So not that this isn't, but what I'm going to talk about here is something I didn't get to last show because I ran out of time too. But I talked last time about how to get money out of politics and what the Democrats should, try and do during the, leading up to the 26 elections, the midterms, and how they got to try and get money out of politics, and hopefully they will, or try to at least when they get back into power. So what I'm going to talk about now is an example of how money really has messed up politics. And you probably heard, if you are on social media at all, right, that Mark Zuckerberg, who owns Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, probably other things too, but those are the four main ones, I think. Right, and then Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, the so-called liberal Washington Post newspaper, and Amazon, right? They're billionaires. They each have paid $1 million to the Trump inauguration fund. I think by the end of it, they'll probably be paying more than that. But this is certainly a signal that they're bending the knee to Trump. They're going to go, all Trump all the time now on their social media platforms or, the Washington Post. There's already been lots of, liberals leaving the Washington Post in droves, and I'm sure it'll continue if Bezos does start making these decisions to stop, anti-Trump writing in that paper. Plus, Zuckerberg, he just announced he's going to get rid of, fact checkers because they are, quote, too politically biased, close quote. Plus, not only that, he's changed the hateful conduct policy that he had. So now it's going to be easier to post hate speech on those platforms. And he also announced that, noted Trump humper Dana White, the owner of the UFC, is going to be on the Meta board now. So this is just, this is not a coincidence. I mean, Zuckerberg is turning his media platforms into another X, like Musk has now. So there's going to be more and more misinformation and disinformation from the Republican Party to make it harder for the Democrats to win in 2 years. And this is why I keep harping on the Democrats. You've got to start doing more on social media. You got to start doing more, better communicating with people to combat all this misinformation that is going to be coming your way. So what the Republicans have done, I mean, they're literally buying up social media platforms and then, rolling out the lies. Right? Democrats, you got to start doing something about this, because otherwise it's going to make it harder for you to win elections. And another reason why they're doing this, I think, is because they didn't like that the the Biden administration went after them. The FCC chairwoman Lena Khan, had hearings, and they went through they changed some regulations on these tech companies, regulating them more. So of course they want to get rid of that, so they can do whatever they want. So they join forces to get Trump in there so they can get rid of her. And here's some other things I think that they're going to do with their money and with Trump is they're going to expect Republicans to get rid of the regulations that Biden did so they can make more money. And I think you're also going to see these guys ask the Trump administration to expand cryptocurrency as a source of money in our economy, because these guys are kind of into this already, especially Musk. And I think you might see something like that being proposed. And I also think you're going to see the Republicans pass more AI friendly stuff. Now, why do I think that? Well, if they get that through, then the Zuckerbergs and the Bezoses of the world can replace human labor force with robots. Right? Then they don't have to deal with their workers. They don't have to pay the wages. They don't have to pay wages to robots. And they can get rid of unions. This is the big thing behind all this, I think, is they're trying to get rid of the unions. I've talked before about how Bezos is suing right now to get rid of the National Labor Relations Board so that there's less protection for unions. This is how money has taken over our politics. So these guys are actually, they're giving money to the Trump administration to do what they, do stuff for them, which includes getting rid of the unions. Now, do you think these guys care about you, the average worker? Of course not. They want to get rid of the unions that help you get higher wages and more vacation and, that sort of stuff. They just want more of your money. Just like Trump, the whole grifting is the whole part of the gig here for him. So another thing that they're doing is they're trying to get the government to do it for them. Get these big government contracts. They're going to have the choice seats at the inauguration. Probably gave them more money, to do that too. So, I've always asked, like, why do billionaires need more money in the first place? Isn't $1 billion enough? Like, I hope when the Democrats get in power, at some point they tax the crap out of them again. Now, this Congress sure as heck ain't going to do it. But this goes to what I mentioned earlier about how the Democrats should start defining this as class warfare between the rich people and the rest of us. Because I think this is a way they can, win future elections is argue the economics behind this stuff, because it's definitely out there and definitely growing. So again, when is there, $1 billion? Is that enough money? Why do these guys want more and more money? So here's a thought to leave you with today. If you want some control over your life, you need to be interested in and participate in politics, right? Because it affects your life. So this is why politics matters to everybody. We'll talk to you next week.